What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Geek-Stew, and of course, welcome back to Horror Stew. Yes, that's right. Today is Friday, and that means that I'm going to be delivering a little bit of a taste of something horrific to you today. And that is going to be something that we actually haven't talked about in a little while, and I'm actually pretty excited about to dive back into this. And this may be something I continue on in the future as well, but I was thinking about it, and I remember the last time I did this, it was a lot of fun talking about it. But today, guys, we're going to be talking about internet urban legends. So the last time we talked about this, we talked about Slender Man. But this time, we're going to be talking about a similar counterpart, I suppose, of Slender Man, in that this is just as an evil person and so on and so forth. But this is going to be Jeff the Killer. So let's get into it, guys. Today, guys, we're going to talk about the evil creation that is Jeff the Killer. So Jeff the Killer is one of those stories that started off in a very early time on YouTube, actually. The original video is from October 3rd, 2018 on YouTube. And the video, and of course, and this is also just kind of in regards to the original story too, but there's the infamous face of Jeff the Killer right here. And this was on the YouTube video. That's just all that was on the YouTube video, right? It was this, and it was the story of Jeff the Killer. Now, I'm not going to read the whole story, okay, because it's it's not long per se, but there's a lot of, the original story is not that great, I'm not going to lie. The original story is sort of, how you would say, it sounds like a 5-year-old wrote it, and that's how they think horror movies work. But for what it was quite entertaining, especially during such a tentative time on the internet as the 2008s and moving forward into the 2010s. But the story basically was about a guy named Jeff, or I think it was Jeffrey specifically, who, spilled a bucket of acid on his face while he was trying to clean his bathtub. Now, of course, by doing this, he gets, I think, bullied and everything else, and then he eventually goes on to attack and kill people. It wasn't necessarily unprovoked in the story. If I remember correctly, he was provoked, and then in doing so, if you will, he reacted, killed, and then continued to kill. Basically, Jeff the Killer is, I would say, it was most likely spawned by the hype of the Joker in the day. Jeff the Killer has very similar features to that of the Joker: a white face, a very large grin, smile that seems almost inhuman, and yeah, so it's one of those things where definitely this was a product of its time, but even though it was a product of its time, it did go on to spawn, I would say, countless stories, and even further than that, Jeff the Killer would also expand into other territories. So basically, you have the original Jeff the Killer, which was the CreepyPasta, who eventually just exploded. Now, here's what I'll say. There are a couple things that I need to talk about with Jeff the Killer. Obviously, if you've never heard the original story, just Google it. Honestly, just Google Jeff the Killer story, and you will find something about Jeff the Killer, because Jeff the Killer is pretty iconic on the internet, and YouTube has probably hundreds of videos about it, and I am sure there are hundreds of different areas where you can read the original story, everything from Reddit to 4chan to even just Facebook and Twitter feeds. I even found something on here on Twitter where somebody was doing a Twitter feed update or something like that about Jeff the Killer, and so on and so forth. And of course, there are also actually videos people have done, just as they have done with Slender Man. They have done fan videos as if Jeff the Killer were after them, and as well there are other actual fan films, and there's actually been rumors of an actual film about Jeff the Killer. So that could be something that we could see in the future, but at least for now, we're going to talk about some of his accolades, and we're going to kind of talk about some of his relationships in regards to other internet urban legends. So I guess the first thing I kind of want to bring up is that I mentioned his appearance briefly, but I want to give an official description of his appearance, And of course the the picture of him that's pretty infamous. But Jeff has extremely pale skin and burnt off eyelids, giving him an even more ghostly appearance. Jeff later got his most distinctive trait, the smile that he had carved into his face with a knife. His build is commonly described as slim but fit at the same time, and reaching a height of around 5 to 6 feet. His clothing normally consists of a pair of black skinny jeans with a white hooded sweatshirt, sometimes stained with fresh or old blood from his victims. Now, if that doesn't give you an indication already that this was made by some teenager in the 2000s who was probably an emo, then I don't know what else to tell you. Jeff the Killer, very much, again, I hate to repeat myself, but it was definitely a product of his time. Now, as for Jeff the Killer's personality, and this is just from the fandom page, guys, I basically pulled some information from here because this is the best place to do it. But basically, his personality is a cruel, sadistic, and insane individual. The smile on his face represents his sadism and overall bloodlust. His appearance shows just how he will focus to harm somebody, and he is primarily presented as a vain, narcissistic, emo-style teenager who has absolutely no intention of following general rules and will only listen to his own self. So that kind of goes to what I was saying previously, the whole black skinny jeans and the white hooded t-shirt, and basically the way that he was given his deformation. It's honestly, it's very, very 2000s, if you will. But what I will say is this. Jeff the Killer, while his origin and some of his early stories are kind of cheesy, I will say that there are some really interesting, I guess, continuations of the Jeff the Killer story, and one of which is Jane the Killer. So if you've never heard of Jane the Killer, basically Jane the Killer was the female antagonist of Jeff the Killer. They were very similar in their methods, and they were very similar in their creation. However, long story short, Jane was a separate character, and it looks like basically the story is that Jeff killed her parents, and then this created Jane the Killer. And obviously her appearance is not as she does have some disfigurement. I'll just kind of read her appearance from the fandom page here for you. So before her disfigurement, Jane had fair skin, long brown hair, as well as green eyes. It was often described as a plain girl. After being burned alive, she had mostly chalk white skin aside from her face, which was badly scorched and a leathery texture. She also had most of her hair singed off and a Glasgow smile carved in her face, courtesy of Jeff. So basically, she adopted a new life. She started wearing a pale, expressionless mask with laced black eyes and black lips, as well as a long, curly, jet black wig, both gifts of Jeff, apparently. And she was also mostly seen wearing dark dresses in varying styles. So basically, Jeff the Killer is the reason for Jane the Killer. Jeff the Killer killed her family, burned down her house or whatever, and caused her to be disfigured. And then Jane, of course, was spawned from that. And then, basically that's it. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Basically, I think that what they were doing, and this has happened a lot of times with other internet urban legends, even happened with Slender Man. Typically, they want to try and evolve on the mythos, so they try and create somebody who was created similar to that of the main protagonist. And in this case, they did so by creating Jane the Killer, who is the exact opposite of Jeff the Killer, because her primary goal was to avenge her friends and family by killing Jeff. That being said, she's sort of like a tragic vigilante, where she has this, tragic backstory of basically Jeff the Killer screwed me over, killed my parents, almost killed me, and now I'm going to basically follow in his footsteps, but only to the extent of I'm going to try and hunt and kill him down. So I guess that's kind of, long story short, what Jane the Killer is about. Jane the Killer, I will say, is not her image itself isn't as scary. Honestly, it looks like they just took a stock image or somebody's Instagram photo and they just used it. Maybe used some Photoshop or Windows Paint there and just kind of color it in her eyes. I'll put the picture here for you guys in case I haven't already. But that being said, Jane the Killer is very synonymous on the internet as well as one of Jeff the Killer's main antagonists, I should say, and as well as the star of the original title, which is Jeff the Killer versus Jane the Killer. So, like I said, the weird thing about these internet urban legends is that they start off from this weird base point of just being stories being told on YouTube or just on different forums, and it eventually evolves into these multi-sided, multi-dimensional stories where there's different characters being added, different people being included into the story because of actions of the characters. And there are, of course, hundreds, probably maybe even thousands of other people who were created to be added into the canon of Jeff the Killer. Of course, Jane the Killer being one of the only ones that's widely recognized, but regardless, still being that person. So I guess the next thing that I would want to talk about is that there was even sort of a crossover with another very popular entity on the internet. So, of course, all things on the internet are kind of subject to, if you will, they're subject to the general ideology that, of course, things on the internet are not always set in stone in the way things are like in modern media. There are no official ties, since technically all things on the internet are considered fan fiction or original stories regardless. So, that being said, there is a relation to Slender Man, the individual that we talked about before. If you don't know who Slender Man is, I did a really great video about him previously. And really, this obviously isn't a solidified connection to Slender Man per se, but there are, of course, some fan works that do depict Slender Man as a mortal enemy to Jeff the Killer, having on par skills or strength. So there's that. There's also some great fan fiction about how they dated. That's great too. However, the one that I really enjoyed, and I guess this is not something that's really ever set in stone, but a fan story that I read that I actually quite enjoyed. And I promise it wasn't like any weird like yaoi or anything like that. But basically, there are a lot of stories where Jeff is depicted as a proxy of Slender Man, but not just any kind of proxy. He's like a super proxy who broke out of Slender Man's grasp and basically is not able to be controlled. That being said, this kind of creates sort of a weird hypothetical where, like, oh man, Slender Man was going to create him as a proxy, so he created all this tragedy in his life, made him deformed in an attempt to get, garner control over him, and then basically Jeff the Killer essentially exceeded that of the power in which his proxy was trying to take hold over him. But that being said, this is a very rare occurrence, even though technically all things in the fan fiction world are, I guess, rare occurrences in and of themselves. But I like to think that that's kind of an interesting concept, that Jeff the Killer would be a proxy of the Slender Man. But I guess the last thing that we want to touch on would be basically, what modern takes on Jeff the Killer do we have? Is there any update to that? Is there any solidification of a storyline? And I even mentioned a movie previously, so I guess we'll even talk about that. So basically, in the modern day, long story short here, there was never really any update to the quote-unquote Jeff the Killer movie that I was mentioning previously. So basically, in 2015, there was an Indiegogo created to fundraise the Jeff the Killer movie. There was a trailer made and put on YouTube. It was just a conceptual trailer. You could probably go find it if you really wanted to. It was really interesting. It had a very idyllic look at what we were kind of anticipating for the Jeff the Killer look. And basically, again, long story short, we were basically waiting for the Indiegogo to get the funds that it needed to create the movie. Now, there really hasn't been any information as to why or what happened. Basically, from what I can tell in my research, there was never any update to this. However, technically, this was supposed to be something that was in the works. I'm not sure what happened with the production. I checked the Indiegogo fundraiser page, and there's really no information that I can tell. I even looked on Reddit, which is always great. And basically everybody said the same thing, is that it probably just didn't pan out. Somebody also mentioned that there were some fan films made on YouTube, of course. And there was even one that may have even been basically the same production team. But you can go find that on your own if you want to and watch it. I didn't watch the fan film on YouTube, but apparently there is one. So that could be an interesting concept to kind of open up to, is that there could potentially again be another fan film of this being made. Now, I will say that with the pretty much critical panning of the Slender Man film, I would somewhat be hesitant if I were a production company to try and put out another urban legend from the internet as a film. But I suppose that there could be worse things that they could be making, and they tend to make those. So I don't know, that's at least my opinion. But, we've talked a lot about Jeff the Killer today, and we've talked a lot about his origins, as well as what he is, as well as some of the other forms of media he appears in. But I guess now it's time for final thoughts. So final thoughts, guys. So, long story short, Jeff the Killer was one of those internet urban legends that really caught my attention when I was younger. I really got into the mythology and the story behind it, if you will. And it was very creative and unique for its time, of course. And not to say that it's any less creative or unique now, but it definitely doesn't hold the same power or allure over you, basically after you read it the first time. There's a lot of great media about Jeff the Killer, and potentially even fan films as well as professionally made films. I don't know. But I will say is this: there is always the possibility that this could obviously come back up in the popular media in the near future. I feel like creepypastas lately are making a resurgence, especially in, younger groups who weren't alive during the original resurgence of creepypastas to begin with. But I definitely have hope that maybe one day this will make a resurgence and maybe be revitalized as a newer, more branded story. But that being said, I don't want to talk too much on this again because, of course, I don't want to ramble too much for you guys. But I hope you guys did enjoy this quick video about Jeff the Killer. It was a lot of fun going back and reviewing old stuff about Jeff the Killer. And, this is stuff from over 10 years ago, which is crazy to me that Jeff the Killer has been around for that long, where that creepypastas in general have been, a decade worth of material there. But that being said, guys, if you guys did enjoy, please give us a like and a subscribe. Leave us a comment down below. Or, of course, hit us up on Facebook or Twitter. That, of course, is going to be in the description down below, as well as at the end of the video. And as always, guys, if you're interested in joining the Geek-Stew crew, please feel free to send us a message or leave a comment down below with your interest. And we're more than happy to include you as part of our group, because we love to expand and we would love to have other people be part of our crew, have people make content for us and everything else. So, as always, guys, stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy, and we will see you in the next one. See ya.